We begin this hour with breaking news at Florida State University in Tallahassee.
Law enforcement says one person has died and one person is in custody after a shooting at the student union on campus. At least 6 people have been hospitalized. The university says classes are canceled through Friday.
We heard from an eyewitness who spoke with NBC News just a short time ago.
People thought it was like construction at first, but then the shots got more frequent, closer together. We saw a bunch of people running away from the union outside.
Joining us now, NBC News correspondent George Solis. George, I know this is a rapidly changing situation developing still, but what do we know right now?
Yeah, officials in Tallahassee noting that there will be a press conference this afternoon, earlier this evening, I should say, 4 p.m. tentatively at the Turnbull Center. And that is where we'll expect to hear from a number of law enforcement officials, some elected officials presumably as well, giving us the most comprehensive detail of what noon, which at this hour we now know, unfortunately, there is one fatality, one person in custody. This all centering around that student union area. They're sort of a hub, as we know, across all American campus. Memorial, they reported that they received at least 6 people that were injured, one in critical condition. We haven't received much of an update at this point beyond that. And as far as FSU itself directly, they are still issuing a shelter in place at this time, saying that law enforcement is actively clearing rooms on the main campus. One bit of note on that about what's happening outside of the campus. Earlier this morning, or afternoon I should say, Leon County, the school district there, had issued a lockdown as this investigation was unfolding. They have since lifted that. So around the community area, at least some sense of normalcy. But again, headline here, 4 p.m. press conference, where we will expect to hear some of the more pressing details and many of the hopeful answers to questions that many of us have about how this unfolded this afternoon at 12. And again, we're hearing that students are still continuing to shelter in place at this hour, a few hours after this all took place, guys.
All right, George Solis with the latest on this breaking story. Thanks so much.
Wall Street is facing a third straight day of volatility. Markets are reacting to President Trump's tariff policies and renewed criticism of Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell.
The president and the Federal Reserve are not seeing eye to eye on the impact of tariffs. During an event in Chicago Wednesday, Powell said, quote, tariffs are highly likely to generate at least a temporary rise in inflation. In a True Social post this morning, the president called for lower interest rates. And this afternoon, he once again called out Chairman Powell.
Oh, he'll leave. If I ask him to, he'll be out of there. But I don't think he's doing the job. He's too late, always too late, a little slow, and I'm not happy with him. I let him know it, and if I want him out, he'll be out of there real fast, believe me.
Joining us now, NBC News senior policy reporter Shannon Pettypiece and NBC News White House correspondent Yamiche Alcindor. Yamiche, we should point out that President Trump appointed Mr. Powell to head up the Federal Reserve back in his first term. He said there that if I want him to leave, he will. Is that accurate? Can he get rid of Powell?
Well, it's a key question. We know that the Fed chair, Jerome Powell, has said that he does not believe he can be removed or fired by President Trump. And he said that if President Trump asked him to resign, that he would not do so. He's pointing to the Federal Reserve Act, which established the Fed more than a century ago. And in that establishing legislation, it points out that the governors and leaders of the Fed, that they are to serve 14-year terms and that they're not supposed to be removed unless for cause. And policy differences does not fall under the cause action of that courts have found. So courts have backed up the idea that the president can't just fire the Fed chair, and the Fed chair is supposed to, Jerome Powell, serve until May 2026. That being said, the president, we can see the president wanting to say that he wants to remove Jerome Powell, and it's not without the realm of possibility, outside the realm of possibility, that President Trump tries to do so. This will likely end up being another court battle for the Trump administration, and it's really anyone's guess what the courts would say, especially the Supreme Court.
So Shannon, let's bring you in. If we've learned anything the last few weeks, we know the markets like stability. So can you explain why Powell's job potentially being in jeopardy here is causing alarm on Wall Street and beyond?
Well, here's why this is important. The Federal Reserve is supposed to be an independent body and agency that thinks in the long-term interests of the U.S. economy. It's not supposed to be subjected to any sort of political influence or any sort of whims of a president. The way a president, for example, wouldn't be able to use the Fed for their own political advantage, like lowering interest rates before an election. So if the independence of the Fed was put into question, that could really destabilize so much investor confidence around the world in the U.S. economy, where investors from not just the U.S. but other countries come to put their money as a safe, stable place to invest. If they don't feel that, not only does that hurt U.S. stock markets, bond markets, but it can also just drive up the cost for the U.S. to borrow money, which ends up costing taxpayers as well in the end.
Yamiche, the president is meeting with Italy's prime minister to talk about tariffs today. He did the same thing with Japanese officials yesterday at the White House. What is the White House hoping to get out of all these negotiations?
Well, President Trump and White House officials say that what they really want to get out of these negotiations is better deals for the United States, and that includes decreasing the trade deficits in a number of places, including with our relationship with the European Union, which of course Italy is part of, but also the Asian countries and Japan, China. So they're hoping that the president will be able to get some of these tariffs possibly lowered, but also just get some more money, they say, for the United States.
All right, Yamiche Alcindor, Shannon Pettypiece, thank you.
Well, there is a new twist today in the long-awaited resentencing hearing that could determine the fate of the Menendez brothers.
There's been a lot of back and forth today.